What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Hey there, party people. It's your boy Archlich, but you can just call me Archie, and today I'm interrupting our regularly scheduled programming to bring all of you something a little different than our usual lecture, specifically to talk about something special. Today we'll be talking about the recently released D&D official adventure, Vecna, Eve of Ruin. I spent the past week or so going through the adventure, and I thought I'd provide my thoughts on the matter. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I will be avoiding spoilers for the most part, and I'm also going to give you my honest opinion, but I will try to be fair in my considerable criticisms without holding back or being soft in any way. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Vecna, Eve of Ruin is sold to us as a massive in scope, high-level adventure for our players to swashbuckle across the multiverse and cross paths with many titular characters from across the settings of Dungeons & Dragons. And it should take the players from 10th all the way to 20th level. The book itself comes in at 256 pages, with the 4 firstmost pages being art and the table of contents. 198 pages consisting the actual adventure and a creature appendix at the back, rounding out the last 50 pages. There's also a neat little map of your home base provided that you can tear out and use if you get the physical version. The physical copy will cost you $60 US, and the digital version will be running you back $30 US. Not particularly cheap, but I suppose that leaves us begging the question, do I recommend buying it? My answer is no. And we'll get into why, but first let me compliment what I believe is done well in this book before I unleash my somewhat harsh criticisms of this product. I have to say that the art in this book is nothing short of phenomenal. The book is chock full of beautiful art from cover to cover, and I would like to officially extend my compliments to the artists who have had a hand in making this book. Their work was stunning, and they deserve a raise. I also like that they included the maps in the back of the book, but this is just for the physical version. I'm unsure if they provide something similar in the digital version. Overall, the design was great. The text was all clear and easy to read, ink was good, and I didn't experience any misprints or flaws in the book's construction. The physical book was solid and well put together as well. For the art and overall design, I give this book a 5 out of 5. Many of the monster themes and ideas were quite cool as well, but please note I'm referencing the ideas and their aesthetics, not the mechanical aspects of their design, which I will touch on in due time. But this painfully brief section is all the good things that I could muster. I suppose now we get to the part that most of all of you came here for. The complaining. First, let me say that in my opinion, I'm not the end-all be-all of what is good and what is not. There may be some people out there that actually enjoy this product and have fun with it. That being said, here's what I think. Let me start off by saying that I was very surprised to find myself pretty damn frustrated after finishing the book and taking a minute or two to think about it. I do have to say, the more time I've spent thinking about it, the more frustrated I've actually become. But what about the actual criticisms? Where do I even start? Before I get into anything else about this book, let me just come out and say that, in my opinion, the writing is absolutely awful. It feels lazy. The choices your players make never matter, and everything is written to be done a specific way. The book is constantly railroading your players into handling the situations presented to their characters specifically the way the writers want it to be handled, and they are actively punished for trying to be creative or for thinking outside of the box. Wizards basically wrote an interactive novel. There are no decisions that matter at all for the characters in this story. None of your choices have any consequences, and everything is already laid out the way that it's supposed to be. And all the writing has to do with is basically railroading your players into taking a very specific course of action that ends the same way, no matter how they do it. I looked at every decision that your players could make in this book, and it was non-consequential. They'll end up on the same path, doing the same things with the same characters, no matter what. And moreover, it was also additionally insulting because this is supposed to be a high-level adventure where the decisions of your characters should feel more substantial. I mean, you start at 10th level, and you go all the way to 20th level, and it is insane to think about how much they restrict you. This book has the problem that all 5th edition content seems to have, which is, it doesn't tell you what you can do, it's telling you what you can't do. Our players find themselves in a certain situation, and will have only one way of solving it. They can't use any of the complex abilities that the player characters have garnered over their long time of adventuring. They can't use their knowledge, or their powers, or special applications of spells, or some sort of smart usage of their abilities to circumvent any of the problems put before them. The book is so fucking lazy with the writing that they don't even bother to tell you why something is the way it is. They just tell you that nothing works except for this course of action. You can't teleport through this thing. You can't dispel magic on the obviously magical effect. Anti-magic field won't work on it either. And we hand wave all of this away because we're fucking lazy and we don't want your powerful characters who have the ability to do the things that powerful people can do to actually use their legendary skills because we want to manufacture a challenge for your high-level characters without having to put in the effort to actually challenge them properly. Another thing I noticed in the book, and it pertains to what I was talking about earlier, is that it's written to make your characters seem like the most incompetent schmucks in the entire world. This adventure is sold to us as a massive high-level adventure for our players to swashbuckle across the multiverse and cross paths with many titular characters from across the settings of Dungeons & Dragons. But the writing completely robs your player characters of any agency whatsoever. Everything they do is decided by someone else. They're told to go here and do this thing by character A, and then they are told to do this thing by character B. But they can't find out what they need to find out without character C, and they can't get through this door except for doing it this specific way by getting this specific item from this specific boss that they're getting railroaded into fighting or something of the like. I was looking at one of the dungeons that was in this book, and there's basically a magically sealed door. And the description of this fucking door basically says that it is impossible to pick, even though it has a key, and there's a trap on the door that can't be disarmed. Dispel magic on it, or anti-magic field, doesn't stop it, and you can only get through it if you have the item you need. There was also a different door in a different scenario that had a lock on it and a magical trap as well. It seemed to indicate that you can't disarm the magical trap, and that any way you open the door other than using the key that a certain character had on them triggers this trap. They at least let you unlock the door without it, but there was no way to not trigger this trap. And I couldn't help but thinking this is so fucking stupid. I mean, you have to think about it like this. If you're a high fantasy setting, people know about the existence of magic, and in the same way that we have ridiculous amounts of information on very arcane systems like cybersecurity needed to keep your data safe, that's still routinely crackable by people that are experts in the subject, that are always finding ways to poke holes in said systems, they would know that it's not far-fetched to assume that rogues in this setting would likely have it as part of their thieves' tools to counteract these measures in some sort of way. Perhaps they have some sort of instrument or materials involved that are used to counteract them. Maybe they would know how to look for these measures that were put in a certain way. I mean, however you really want to justify it doesn't matter, but like, for example, with magical traps on locks, maybe an experienced thief has some type of material that they have in a pouch, like a powder that they poof through the lock that makes it look so that they can see the glyphs inscribed on the inside of the lock, or, you know, whatever type of process you want to use to describe it, but they're a competent, legendary character, and they should be able to circumvent a lot of these problems, because at the end of the day, what makes D&D fun is your characters are cool. They're cool. They can do stuff. They're powerful, and they can circumvent things. They don't need to do all the things in the quest the way that you wrote them. And if they use their brains, they can figure out how to do something like opening a fucking door or a magical barrier. This long-winded example is merely there to make the argument fundamentally, that you shouldn't fear your players being powerful. The characters being high-level heroes will be capable of solving problems and using their vast wealth of impressive abilities to figure out how to solve a problem without having to have their hand held the whole way. And this book fails so miserably in that department, to the point where I feel like it would be genuinely disheartening to be a player in this module, as it completely disrespects the character you bothered to write and put your time and effort into making. Now let's talk about the writing a little bit. Ultimately, I don't feel that the writing is intentionally disrespectful, but I do feel that it's very lazy, and by extension, it feels very disrespectful to the players at the table. There's nothing wrong with having a more solid storyline in place for your games. I tend to enjoy more of a sandbox style of playing, but that is by no means the right way to play the game. However, I do think that what makes D&D and other tabletop RPGs so great is that their lack of restrictions allows them to shine. Your characters are free to be who they are, and they are allowed to make decisions that truly affect the world that they inhabit as you work together with each of the players to craft a story together. This is what makes Dungeons & Dragons different from just booting up a video game and chugging away, and this adventure completely robs your players of that, in my opinion. Everything feels rushed, all of the characters you meet are ridiculously shallow in the context of this story, the players couldn't be asked to give a flying fuck about any of them, the module makes huge assumptions about how your players are going to respond and shoehorns them into any decision that needs to be made to push the plot to where it needs to go, and even the illusion of choice isn't there. Hell, there's even a situation in one of these chapters where the book straight up tells you to just change the location of an item should the players manage to get a certain character that keeps that item on them when they're not supposed to. I was flabbergasted by the sheer laziness of this writing team, and after taking in the writing of this steaming pile of shit, I am 100% convinced that I could write a much better take on this style of adventure, and so could you. Everything from the characters, to the narrative, to the places your players find themselves in are just handled in the most lazy, half-assed way. There's no incentive to explore, everything is as wide as an ocean, but as deep as a puddle on the side of the road. How about the stats and the fights? They're all way too easy. Even the optional super scary boss that the book tells you probably shouldn't allow the players to fight is laughably weak in comparison to what your players can do. I think the game designers at Wizards have a fundamental lack of understanding of what late game play should look like, and it shows in how they stat their late game baddies, along with how they try to restrict their players. I can tell that they really think that they made some powerful high CR creatures that could pose a challenge to the players, but honestly, all of them are pushovers. Their spells are all very underwhelming. They don't have even close to enough hit points to last against a well-equipped group of high-level adventurers. I think the highest AC I see in the book is 21, which is laughably low for this level of play in a book with many creatures higher than CR 20, mind you. Every fight is fought on the player's terms unless they severely fuck up, and still they usually don't even have to deal with that since their decisions change nothing about the story. Quite impressively, the bosses in this book are actually the most disappointing. I can tell the designers thought they were giving them strong pools of hit points and a high AC, but that just goes to show that whoever Wizards of the Coast has designing their monsters has absolutely no grasp of how to make proper monsters for this fucking game. I mean, Vecna's stat block is appalling, and he's likely to die in one round with his crappy stats. I also noticed that in classic 5e fashion, the designers are allergic to their players getting powerful magical items from the baddies that they beat. But they're more than happy to give them to the baddies and simply just do takesy-backsies in another astonishing masterstroke of lazy-ass design. I can't even recall how many items I read about in this book that work as a completely different magical item for the creatures that the party faces, and have their rules changed when they aren't in the possession of the original creature. I find this so fucking infuriating. I can tell that they nerf the items because they're worried about balance, but it's obvious that these literal monkeys on the design team have no idea how to actually balance their game beyond like 5th level. So instead of letting their players get a bunch of cool loot, not that it even matters in this adventure, they just bullshit and hand-wave it away because they're allergic to their players having fun. This only results in your players feeling like they're constantly being denied the cool things that other people get to do. essentially meaning that your players get to be boring, basic, stock clowns while everyone else in this story gets to have all the cool items and powers, yet the players are supposed to be the cool, standout main characters. Give me a fucking break. This book does everything it can to handicap the fun that your players could have both on and off the battlefield, to the point that your players are just going to be glorified rubes sent on the multiverse's longest fucking fetch quest. Honestly, I commend Wizards for having the balls to charge as much as they did for this absolute piece of shit module, and they should be ashamed of how this turned out. Hopefully the artists get a raise rather than another round of massive fucking layoffs to feed the demons that run this company. The story is boring. The NPCs are somehow boring, even though they're some of the most famous characters in the fucking setting. The villains are all pushovers, and worst of all is the way that it treats the players is borderline insulting. In the spirit of fairness, I suppose I should offer some constructive criticism as final thoughts. I doubt any writers from Wizards of the Coast would see this, but maybe this could help some of you seeking to run the adventure make it worth your while, so that your players might actually have some fun. So here are my recommendations if you're looking to run them. First, give the players more agency. You're going to need to break down almost every chapter of this story and really build it out with more characters, with more moving parts, more locations, and more decisions for your players to make. Give them more opportunities to interact with the places they go and the denizens held therein. Allow them to establish meaningful relationships with some of the characters that they encounter, and have alternative plans based off of how the story progresses over time depending on the decisions that they make. Add more characters. I know I already said this, but I'm gonna say it again. This story needs more characters that stick with the party, and that they can befriend or make enemies of over time. It feels like no one in this story really matters, and NPCs are just hollow shells serving as glorified quest markers. Frankly, it's just more of the incredibly lazy writing I've been mentioning previously. Let your players be competent. Your players are high-level adventurers, and they should be playing an active role in figuring things out. They should be able to circumvent obstacles with their impressive powers, and not by always having to do some stupid shit that the book spells out as being the only way to solve a problem. Maybe you even present them with a problem that doesn't have a prescriptive pre-built solution, and see what your players can come up with to circumvent this problem. This will go a long way in making them feel not like useless idiots that are only good for headbutting the HP bag put in front of them after they fumble around for about 5 hours trying to guess what the specific thing the book says that they need to do to progress the story. Make the characters feel more important. As they increase in power, they should have more influence on the things that go on in their story. The powerful characters your players have come to know should start cluing them in on recent events, and should eventually be coming to them for advice or decisions on how they should be proceeding in their goals. Stop gatekeeping the powerful items. Let your players be powerful. If the enemies get fancy magic items, you don't get to handwave them away when the players kick their ass and take the items for themselves. This is so lazy, and it's not fun for anyone. Make your monsters stronger too. I'm okay with the stats for the regular monsters in this book being underwhelming in comparison to the characters, as that allows them to feel powerful as they take them on and fight off armies of whoever their opponents might be. But the bosses need to be way stronger than they are. Across the board, they all need a buff, including even Vecna himself, who is laughably weak for a 20th level encounter. Mind you, he's rated CR 26 by the way. All of the fights will be ridiculously disappointing otherwise, and none of the stages are set for smart tricks to be used, so they're going to need all the buffs that they can get. And lastly, have multiple endings. Let the players explore different paths without going into too much detail. Let the players make titular decisions that can warrant different outcomes based off of what they do. Let them wheel and deal for allies, save people, or reave their way through this adventure if they're villains. Maybe they want to secretly hijack Vecna's ritual. Your imagination is the limit, but please, you owe it to your players to give them some actual fucking choices. Dear God. But, with all this being said, I believe this encapsulates my thoughts on the recent module. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend this product to anyone. It's absolutely disappointing in every area that truly matters. And there are much better modules for you to pick up out there. I'm honestly sad to see this. Wizards was no doubt hit hard by the layoffs that their overlords dropped on them, and I was hoping they could provide a solid product that could get them back on the right track, but it seems that my hopes were sorely misplaced. As always, I would like to thank all of my conspirators and acolytes graciously furthering the cause of evil. Through their contributions to the Evil Defense Fund, they help make this work possible. And together, we can make the world just a little bit worse for everyone in it. And to you all, thank you for watching. This has been your boy Archlich, and I'll see you when next we meet.